Joining us right now, great pleasure to welcome a man who'll be speaking at the Forum Proof Series coming up on November 18th. That's a Thursday night, 7:30 at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Sarasota. His topic is going to be Global Zero, Nuclear Weapons from the Cold War to Today. We're joined by the 2010 Pulitzer Prize winning author and Washington Post journalist David Hoffman today by telephone. David, thanks for being with us. How are you?
My pleasure.
Good to talk to you. Saw the nice write-up our local book author did in the Herald Tribune. So I'm sure you're going to get a lot of people coming out to see you, and you're coming down at a good time here in Sarasota.
You know, I think that this is a really big subject in the country. People are still interested in the idea of what nuclear threat do we face and what do we do about it.
It almost seems now, when you look at it, it wasn't that long ago, but Russia was always thought to be our mutual biggest enemy, and now it's been going on the last 10 years or so. People, I guess, tend to forget a little bit how dicey things were back in the 80s, right? Even before that as well, but even in the 80s, right?
Well, this book that I've just published, The Dead Hand, tells the story of how close we came in some of those very, very tense moments at the end of the 80s. And not only in nuclear weapons, it also tells the story of kind of a dirty underside of the Cold War, which was the development of germs as weapons by the Soviets. Now, since the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of what the Soviets done has been exposed, and some of it's been cleaned up. And at the same time, I think people will be surprised to find out how many nuclear weapons are still around.
There was always the talk of both sides drawing down nuclear weapons and destroying them, but apparently that was not done, right? At least to the extent people thought.
Well, some of it was done. Let's give them some credit that at the peak of the Cold War, there were 60,000 nuclear warheads, and there's a lot fewer today. But I would think that listeners would be surprised to find out how many warheads there really are today, which I'll talk about, and how difficult it is to get the numbers down lower at a time when we don't have a Cold War, when we aren't facing each other toe-to-toe, across the divide. And it's another interesting thing that a lot of the land-based missiles, we still have 450 of them, are still on hair-trigger alert. And a big question is, what do we need that kind of alert? Those missiles are ready to fire 4 minutes after the president gives an order. Now, that kind of speed may have been necessary in another age when we faced the Kremlin, and everybody said you had to have a cocked pistol for deterrence. But deterrence today isn't necessarily the same, and I don't know of any of terrorists that have been deterred at all by our land-based missiles.
When you have a large group of people that don't care if they die or almost looking forward to dying, it's a different type of warfare now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's called asymmetric warfare because it's uneven. But one of the things I've been arguing is that we can have a much smaller deterrent, fewer nuclear warheads, and still feel quite safe about the major nuclear powers like China and Russia. Our problems are far different than they were then, but we haven't changed our deterrent, and we still have thousands and thousands of nuclear warheads. They were built for another era, by the way, an era that ended almost 20 years ago.
Covered this story, and you knew President Reagan probably quite well, and Mikhail Gorbachev. What was kind of some of the backroom goings-on back then? I know there was that famous meeting, I guess, wasn't there in Reykjavik, where Reagan and Gorbachev kind of met together? Was that something that happened?
I tell this story in the book, Doug, and this is a really dramatic and even today sort of surprising story, because when you look behind the curtains, what you see is that both Reagan and Gorbachev, for entirely different reasons, had come to a very similar conclusion that it would be a good idea to abolish nuclear weapons. And I know people often don't think of Reagan as a nuclear abolitionist, but after he passed away, we were able to read his personal diaries. And in his diaries, he expressed this desire, oftentimes very much in private. He didn't talk about it publicly, but finally, in 2006, in 1986, the 6th year of Reagan's presidency at Reykjavik, he and Gorbachev almost did it. Gorbachev also felt a great burden on his country of the Cold War, and he wanted to scale back. He wanted to have a lot less money spent on weapons so he could try and rebuild the Soviet system. So at that famous summit, they came very, very close, and that was probably the most dramatic arms control summit of the entire Cold War.
Yeah, I just remember seeing the coverage of it back then, and how those two guys were trying to get all the the assistants away from them at times, so they could just meet one-on-one, and give Gorbachev credit. I guess he really respected Ronald Reagan, didn't he? I mean, they probably didn't agree on a lot of things, but they respected each other, didn't they?
I think it took a while.
Mm-hmm.
And Gorbachev has said when he first met Reagan, he thought that he was sort of a political dinosaur. So it took Reagan some time, too. I argue in the book that actually had we had a little better intelligence and more common sense, they could have come to agreements much sooner. And part of it is that we were afflicted by kind of a Cold War mindset of distrust and mistrust and suspicion. And I've argued repeatedly that that's one of the illnesses we still have. And, you know, we built the stock markets now in Moscow. We showed them capitalism. And I wonder sometimes, you know, do we have our hair trigger alert missiles aimed at the stock markets that we built there?
How different is it over there now, since they do have more of a capitalistic economy? I guess obviously not the way as much as we would like it here, but is it much more settled now over there? I mean, we hear now that there's a lot of infighting and the government isn't quite running that well. But what's your take on that?
Russia today is part of the way down the road to democracy, but not very far compared to where we thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
Russia's a little further down the road toward capitalism, but again, not as far as we thought it would be. So you might say it's sort of a proto-capitalist democracy. You know, does it mean that it won't get there? No, because things change quickly, and if you even look at the American experience, you know, it took us a long time to perfect these things. But I think one of the key elements is whether or not leadership of a country wants to take it there. And one of the disturbing things of the last decade is that Russia has had leaders that don't seem to be as interested in full-throated competition, either in politics or in the economy. And that's what's essential. Also, the whole idea of civil society, this thing that we have created with such great passion, you know, our electoral democracy, the way we tell our leaders what we think and vote them in and out. And for this, there's been very, very little leadership in Russia. And Russians themselves are exhausted from all these revolutions they've had, from all this turmoil. So the fact that things are a little calmer and a little bit, you know, less upheaval has made people feeling certainly happier about their standard of living, which has gone up. But the next step, which is to create a healthy society full of competition, hasn't happened yet.
The story, which you covered it firsthand, it's going to be fascinating to hear your take on it coming up on Thursday, November 18th at the Sarasota Hyatt Regency. You can get ticket information at forumtruth.org. It starts at 7:30 p.m. David, appreciate you taking a few minutes, and we'll look forward to seeing you down here. And it's nice weather, so you'll get out of D.C. for a little bit.
Okay, I look forward to it.
Great. Thanks, David.